Hey there, in this video I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how to improve your emotes for Twitch, Discord, YouTube and the like. These tips work for many graphics programs, not just the one that I'm using here, which is Clip Studio Paint. Most of these tips are suited for many different styles. It doesn't even necessarily need to be drawings, and it can also be applied to badges and other small size designs. Alright then, let's start. Tip number 1. Have a small preview open at all times. When you're working on your emote, you are usually zoomed in very close. However, at the actual size it will have in chat, it's gonna look quite different. Instead of constantly zooming in and out, you can have a preview window open that shows your project in a much smaller size. You can use the navigator for that, or you open a new window, which is a duplicate of the canvas you're currently working on. There you can adjust the zoom level to match the small size format. By the way, I can recommend this in general. Having a smaller version of your project visible helps you to see the overall composition and contrasts, so that you don't get too absorbed in small details. Tip number 2. Make your emotes larger than the minimum size, unless you're doing pixel art. If you are already keeping track of how your emote is looking like at the smallest size, then you can go ahead and make the canvas significantly larger. Go for sizes above 400, 500, 800 pixels, whatever you want. Although there is no point in completely overdoing it, and many platforms have file size restrictions. Having more pixels can be helpful while working on the emote, and also enables you to use the files for other purposes, like prints for example. The only exception would be pixel art. In that case you would go the opposite way, start at the smallest size like 28 by 28 pixels for Twitch, and then upscale the image by multiplying it by whole numbers. Make sure that you choose an interpolation method with hard edges in that case. Tip number 3. Switch your background color. All of those platforms like Twitch, Discord, YouTube and so on have both light and dark modes. Different people have different preferences, so you want to make sure that your emotes look good on either theme. It's enough to switch between a white and a dark gray background. Create an extra fill layer to make switching easier. You could even go and pick the specific gray of the chat where the emotes are gonna show up. Some common mistakes I have seen is that some people have very dark looking emotes, like a black kitty, and it ends up being barely recognizable on dark mode. Or some bright sparkles which mostly disappear in light mode. I'm drawing these emotes very hastily because I'm only trying to get a point across. Discord, by the way, technically has a lot more themes, especially if you have Nitro, but I'd recommend to just focus on the standard light and dark mode. Tip number 4. Create enough contrast. You want to make sure that all the important elements of your emote are still distinguishable at the smallest size. Therefore, be careful about the colors you choose. If they are very similar, then you might still be able to tell them apart at large sizes, but at the smaller sizes they start to blend together. In that case, however, lines can be used to separate those shapes. That's mostly what lines are here for, after all. You gotta make sure that the lines are thick enough though, so that they'll show up when shrunk down. Line color is also something to consider. Not only is it an aesthetic choice, but can also be useful for establishing more contrast. So, for example, we could make the black kitty from earlier work by adding bright outlines to separate it from the dark background, and giving the sparkles some darker yet colorful tones. There we go. Tip number 5. Emphasize character expressions. Very often emotes are used to communicate certain emotions, and facial features are essential to show those emotions, most of the time. Therefore, make them large enough and create plenty of contrast. It can be even a good idea to really exaggerate them, making them larger than you normally would. Of course, if you want to go for a specific style, then perhaps don't overdo it too much. However, if it's style versus readability, then I would favor readability. Tip number 6. It's okay to crop out parts. In order to make important features like the face larger and more readable, it can make sense to zoom in so much that the parts will be cropped out. When I created my very first emotes, I made the mistake of always trying to fit in the entire head of the characters I drew. Now this depends of course on the character design and style. In some cases it can be totally fine. But if you have a character with more details and smaller facial features, then I recommend zooming in further. Having all the details like the hair, horns and whatnot in the frame is not as important as the face or other features that are the main focus of your emote. Tip number 7. Don't overload your emote. In other words, don't add too many distracting details. Those details may look good when you're zoomed in, but could make the emote too cluttered looking at small sizes. This doesn't mean, however, that you have to make your emote super simplistic. Adding details is fine, as long as you keep an eye on how it looks like in the preview. The point is simply to avoid visually overloading it. Also, you or your client might want to use the image for other purposes too. For example, showing it on stream at larger sizes, making prints of it like stickers, and so on. In that case, it would make sense to make sure that it looks good in both small and large sizes. Tip number 8. Don't waste too much time with small details. This is especially directed at all of you perfectionists out there, myself included. You don't have to make sure that every single pixel is flawless. A line looks a bit wonky, some areas are not perfectly filled in, drew over the lines a little bit. That's okay, as long as those happy little accidents don't have a significant impact on the emote at small scales. Little mistakes just get shrunk away. However, again, if you're planning on using the image at much larger sizes too, then that may be a different story. Tip number 9. Aim for consistency, when it makes sense. In order to make your sets of emotes of one specific character more professional looking, you might want to make sure that you retain the colors, proportions, style, scaling and such. So for example, if you arbitrarily make the character quite small in some emotes and in others it's really zoomed in, then this might look off, almost as if they were drawn by different artists altogether. Now there are exceptions to this rule, lots of exceptions even. Sometimes it makes sense to zoom in for dramatic effect, or zoom out to add effects. Sometimes you want to change the style to make it look silly. Don't let your creative freedom be restricted. Tip number 10. Make your canvas extra large to draw outside of the frame. By that I mean you're planning on only exporting a certain part of the canvas. This can have several advantages. Firstly, adjusting things like the position and scale can be easier. Secondly, if the emote is cropped in some sort of way, you could create an uncropped version at the same time. This can be useful if you want to use the image for other purposes again, like stickers. And thirdly, this is especially useful for animated movements that go beyond the borders of the frame. If you see the entire thing move, you can make sense of it more easily. In order to switch back and forth between the cropped and uncropped version, a mask layer can be useful. And some programs like Clip Studio Paint offer special canvas options for extending the frame. Depending on the software you use, you can either export by creating a selection for just the frame of the emote, or you have to crop the canvas, export and then undo the cropping again. I, for example, have created a square shape specifically for that purpose so that I can easily make a selection based on that layer. I know, it all is extra effort, but it can be worth it. Tip number 11. Make text as large and easy to read as possible with as little letters as possible. If your emote design includes text, you have to give extra attention to how it looks like at small sizes. You really want to make sure that it doesn't become unreadable. Therefore, make the letters large. Designs like a character speaking with a speech bubble above them sometimes don't work very well. The character would already occupy a lot of space, leaving less for the text. Although, if done well, it can still work. Additionally, choose fonts that are easy to read. So avoid some super fancy looking fonts, even if they may look neat. And also only add short words. Don't try to forcefully squish that long word into that small box. A solution to this would be to separate it into several emotes though. That would use up more emote slots however. Or you could make an animated emote out of it. There would be many ways to do that. And a side note, emotes with singular letters might get rejected on platforms like Twitch, because they could get used to circumvent chat filters to write inappropriate words. Tip number 12. Use an emote tester. There's a free online tool that lets you upload an image to see how it would look like on Twitch and Discord in both light and dark mode. It works with animated GIFs too. This is a convenient way to make sure that your finished work looks good. I personally use it every time when I'm done with a commission and want to show the results to my client, by simply sending a screenshot of these previews. Now, why would you need to do this if you already have the small sized preview up the entire time and switch the background color? Well, your preview might not exactly match the pixel sizes, or the downscaling method is slightly different. With this tester you get a better idea of how it's gonna look like in action. Tip number 14. Follow the platform's terms of service. Not so much a tip for how to make better emotes, but for preventing that your efforts might be wasted, or even worse. You want to be careful because certain emote designs might get reported by users, or rejected during the review phase. On Twitch, for example, some designs, like non-naked butts, are a bit of a grey zone. Copyrighted characters also may get rejected, especially if the emote design would not reflect how the copyright holder would want the character to be portrayed. Those cases sort of depend on the emote reviewer, some are more lenient than others. However, don't push your luck too hard. If the emote is especially inappropriate, then the uploader might even get their account suspended. Tip number 14. Don't copy designs of other artists without their consent. Not really a tip, but more so a guideline on decency, and also legal advice. Other artists put a lot of work into those emotes. If you copy their design almost one-to-one with only a few changes, then this could be deemed highly disrespectful. And also, depending on the level of changes done, could potentially be considered a violation of copyright laws. Of course, it is still okay to use emotes of others as references to create your own unique design. That is normal in the world of art creation. I do that very often too. But if you basically just trace another person's artwork, or copy-paste large chunks of it, then ask them for permission beforehand, and if they say no, then you have to accept that. And there we go, those are all the general tips that I could think of. I hope that they are helpful to you. As always, if you have any constructive feedback, then please leave a comment down below, and if you want to help me create more videos in the future, then perhaps consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you a lot for watching, and see you next time.